The November sun cast long shadows across Thornwell House as Lady Georgiana Hartley sat in the Duke's study, watching flames dance in the hearth. 6 weeks had passed since she arrived at this grand London mansion, drenched from rain, clutching a forged reference letter, desperate to reclaim what had been stolen. 6 weeks since the Duke of Thornwell, believing her to be a mere servant, had commanded her to clean his study. 6 weeks since her disguise had unraveled, revealing the truth. She was not Mrs. Grey the maid, but the rightful Duchess of Courtland, stripped of her inheritance by her treacherous cousin, Lord Percival Hartley. Now everything had changed. The Duke Dominic Grayson had become her ally, her protector, and something far more precious. 3 days ago he had proposed marriage, and she had been too overwhelmed to answer. "You're pensive," Dominic said, entering with tea. At 32, he cut an elegant figure even in shirt sleeves, but it was his gray eyes, once contemptuous, now warm, that made her heart flutter. "I was thinking how much has changed," Georgiana replied softly. "Weeks ago I was scrubbing floors. Now I sit in a duke's study as his. As the woman I intend to marry," Dominic finished, taking her hand. "Though you've yet to formally accept." "How can I," she whispered, "when Percival still holds my duchy? When society thinks me mad, when he could destroy us both with a word to the scandal sheets?" Dominic's expression grew serious. He moved to his desk, withdrawing a leather portfolio and spreading documents across its surface. "Then it's time I showed you what I've been working on these past weeks." Georgiana's breath caught. Bank ledgers, legal affidavits, official correspondence, all bearing high-ranking seals. "This is proof," Dominic said quietly. "Proof Percival bribed Magistrate Holbrook. Proof he falsified your father's will. Proof he's been looting the Cortland estates." He cupped her face. "I've spent a fortune on investigators, called in every favor. I will not let him keep what he stole from you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why risk so much for me?" "Because when you walked into my home that rainy night, I saw extraordinary courage. Because you made me want to tear down the walls I've built around my heart." His voice roughened. "Because I love you, Georgiana." She kissed him, gratitude and love flowing between them. When they parted, she whispered, "What do we do?" "Tomorrow I meet with Lord Ashford, the Lord Chancellor. With this evidence, he'll have to convene an inquiry." Hope blazed in Georgiana's chest. Tomorrow, everything would change. Neither suspected just how violently their world was about to shift. Georgiana's hands trembled as the carriage carried her toward the Marquis of Halford's masquerade ball. She wore borrowed midnight blue silk, a silver mask concealing her face, her hair transformed from servant's bun to elegant coiffure. "You look terrified," Dominic observed beside her, masked in black leather. "I am," she admitted. "What if Percival recognizes me?" "He won't, and I'll be beside you the entire time." But when they entered Halford House, ablaze with candlelight, filled with London's elite, Georgiana's composure nearly shattered. This was her first time among society as an equal since her exile. The memories cut like knives. Then she saw him. Percival, corpulent in plum silk, stood near the refreshments with a thin man in a crimson mask. "Magistrate Holbrook," Georgiana breathed. "The man who declared me incompetent." Dominic's hand tightened on hers. "We observe. We don't engage." The orchestra struck up a waltz. Dominic swept her onto the floor, and despite her fear, Georgiana lost herself in his arms. The warmth of him, the strength, the way he looked at her as though she were his whole world. Over his shoulder, she watched Percival and Holbrook disappear into a private corridor. "I must follow them," she whispered urgently. "No. Too dangerous. Please, Dominic. We may never have another chance." His grip tightened. "We agreed." But Georgiana had not survived 6 months of degradation by accepting defeat. As the music crescendoed, she stumbled deliberately, crying out. In the confusion, she slipped away. The corridor stretched dark and quiet. Following voices to a closed door, she pressed her ear against the wood. "Cannot keep paying these amounts," Percival whined. "The Cortland estates generate income, but liquidating assets draws attention. Our arrangement requires compensation," Holbrook replied coldly. "I falsified documents, committed perjury before the crown. Should the truth emerge, we both hang." Georgiana's heart pounded. This was it. Confession of conspiracy. "The girl was no threat," Percival continued bitterly. "Barely 18, thinking she could manage a duchy. Her father was a fool. I did the Cortland legacy a service." Rage blazed through her. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Dominic materialized from shadows, fury etched on his face. He seized her wrist, pulling her into an alcove. "Are you mad?" he hissed. "What if they discovered you?" "They confessed," she whispered. "Everything we suspected. Your word against theirs means nothing without proof." Tears burned her eyes. "Then what should I do?" "Accept defeat?" His hands framed her face. "Trust me. Let me keep you safe." "I trust you," she breathed. "But I cannot be merely safe. I must be whole." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Brave, brilliant, infuriating. You make me believe trust and love still exist in this world." "What things?" she whispered. "This," he said, and kissed her. His mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger. Weeks of denial finally shattered. Georgiana pulled him closer, answering with equal passion. The kiss spoke everything they'd been afraid to say. When they broke apart, breathless, a voice drawled from the shadows. "Well, well, what have we here?" Percival Hartley stood at the corridor's entrance, eyes glittering with malicious triumph behind his mask. "Remove your mask, cousin," he sneered. "Let's see if the fallen Duchess truly resorts to whoring herself for help." Dominic moved between them like lightning. "Watch your tongue, Hartley." "Threats, your grace?" Percival laughed nervously. "All for a woman declared legally mad." "There were no episodes," Georgiana said, stepping forward with regal bearing. "Only your lies, purchased with my inheritance." "Careful. You're speaking to a peer of the realm." "I am a peer," she shot back. "Or would be, if you hadn't stolen my birthright." Percival's expression shifted to calculation. "I wonder what the scandal sheets would pay. The Duke caught with a servant claiming to be a duchess? Deliciously scandalous." Dominic's fingers interlaced with Georgiana's, a public claim. "Go ahead. But ask yourself, what else might surface when investigators examine falsified documents and purchased magistrates?" Georgiana added, voice steel. "You assumed I'd disappear quietly. But I'm my father's daughter. He taught me some things are worth fighting for, even impossible battles." "You have no proof, no allies." Percival hissed. "She has me," Dominic said quietly, "and I am far from nothing." After a tense moment, Percival stepped back. "This isn't finished. By morning, all London will know your disgrace." He vanished. Georgiana trembled as Dominic held her. "He'll destroy us both," she whispered. "Then we destroy him first," Dominic replied. "Together." And in that moment, he made his decision. He would go to war. The memory of that terrible confrontation faded as Georgiana sat in Dominic's study, looking at the evidence he had gathered over the past 2 weeks. While Percival had been plotting to destroy them through scandal, Dominic had been building an arsenal of truth. "When do we see Lord Ashford?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Dominic replied. "I sent an express courier this afternoon. The Lord Chancellor has agreed to a private audience at 9 o'clock. Georgiana nodded, trying to calm the butterflies rioting in her stomach. Everything hinged on tomorrow. If Ashford believed them, if he agreed to convene an official inquiry, then justice might finally be within reach. "And if he refuses to help?" she asked quietly. Dominic came around the desk and knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Then we try another avenue. And another. And another. I will not rest, Georgiana, until your name is cleared and your inheritance restored. This I swear to you." She looked into his eyes, those gray eyes that had seen so much betrayal and learned to trust again, and felt love swell in her chest like a physical force. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "No," he agreed with a slight smile. "You deserve far better. But you are stuck with me nonetheless." She laughed through her tears, and he rose to kiss her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle benedictions that promised protection and partnership in equal measure. "We should rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be the most important day of your life." But sleep did not come easily for Georgiana that night. She lay in her borrowed bed in Thornwell House, staring at the canopy above, her mind racing through 1,000 possible outcomes. What if Ashford did not believe them? What if Percival had already reached him, poisoning his mind with lies? What if the evidence, so damning to her eyes, was not enough to convince the Lord Chancellor? And underneath all those fears lay another, more terrifying thought. What if justice required her to choose between reclaiming her duchy and protecting Dominic's reputation? If it came to that, which would she choose? She was still awake when dawn broke, painting the London sky in shades of pearl and rose. The morning newspapers arrived at Thornwell House at precisely 8 o'clock, as they did every day. Morrison, the butler, brought them to Dominic on a silver salver, while he and Georgiana broke their fast in the morning room. The moment Dominic unfolded the first paper, his face went completely white. "What is it?" Georgiana asked, alarm spiking through her. Wordlessly, he passed her the scandal sheet. The headline screamed in bold type, "Duke of Thornwell's midnight assignation with mysterious lady." Below it, a second headline, "Lord Hartley's fallen cousin discovered in compromising position," and a third, "The Cortland impostor, a servant's seduction." Georgiana's hands trembled as she read the venomous article beneath. It painted her as a scheming woman of loose morals who had infiltrated Thornwell House under false pretenses, seduced the Duke, and was now attempting to use her influence over him to make false claims against her noble cousin, Lord Percival Hartley. It questioned her sanity, her character, and her motives. It suggested that the Duke of Thornwell, previously known for his cold propriety, had been led astray by feminine wiles. "He has destroyed us both," Georgiana whispered, watching her reputation, what little remained, incinerate before her eyes. "No," Dominic said savagely, taking the paper from her hands and hurling it into the fireplace. "He has overplayed his hand." "How can you say that? By noon, every drawing room in London will be ablaze with this filth. The Lord Chancellor will never agree to see us now, not when associating with us means courting scandal." Dominic crossed to her chair and knelt, capturing both her hands in his. "Georgiana, listen to me. Percival made a critical error. He has publicly tied his reputation to destroying yours. If we can prove his crimes, his public slander of you becomes further evidence of his character. He has painted himself into a corner." "But we were meant to see Lord Ashford privately," Georgiana protested. "Now any inquiry will be conducted in the full glare of public scrutiny. Every detail will be picked apart, every piece of evidence questioned." "I am not strong enough for that, Dominic. I am not." "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he interrupted fiercely. "You survived 6 months of degradation. You infiltrated households looking for evidence. You faced down your enemy at a ball, knowing he could destroy you with a word. You are more than strong enough for this." A knock sounded at the door. Morrison entered, his expression grave. "Your Grace, a messenger has arrived from Lord Ashford's office." Georgiana's heart plummeted. He was canceling their meeting. Of course he was. But when Dominic broke the seal and read the note, his expression shifted to something between surprise and grim satisfaction. "What does it say?" Georgiana asked. "Lord Ashford requests our immediate presence at his chambers," Dominic read aloud. "He has received credible allegations regarding my conduct, and wishes to discuss the Cortland matter before it escalates further. He looked up at Georgiana. He wants to hear our side of the story. Or he wants to publicly distance himself from us, Georgiana countered, fear clawing at her throat. Only one way to find out, Dominic said, rising and offering his hand. Will you come with me? Will you fight? Georgiana looked at his outstretched hand. The hand of the man who had stood beside her when the whole world would have preferred she disappear. The man who had loved her when she had nothing to offer but a scarred heart and stubborn will. She placed her hand in his. I will fight, she said, for justice, for truth, and for us. Lord Ashford's chambers occupied an imposing suite of rooms in Westminster, all dark paneling and floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound law books that spoke of generations of jurisprudence. The air smelled of parchment, beeswax, and the faint mustiness of ancient documents. When Georgiana and Dominic were shown into the Lord Chancellor's private office, they found a man of 60, with deeply lined face, sharp blue eyes, and an immaculately powdered wig. He sat behind a massive oak desk, his expression grave and unreadable. Your Grace, Ashford said without preamble, rising to greet them. His gaze shifted to Georgiana. And Lady Georgiana Hartley, I presume? Or should I say, the woman claiming to be the Duchess of Cortland? I am the Duchess of Cortland, Georgiana said quietly, lifting her chin despite the fear singing through her veins. By blood and by law. That, Ashford said, gesturing for them to sit, is what we are here to determine. He settled back into his chair, steepling his fingers. I find myself in an extremely delicate position. On one hand, I have Lord Percival Hartley, a peer of good standing, who has made serious accusations regarding both your characters. On the other, I have a duke of impeccable reputation, vouching for a woman society has deemed either mad or an impostor. My lord, Dominic began, but Ashford held up a hand. Let me finish, Your Grace. The scandal sheets are already ablaze with this story. Questions are being asked in Parliament. The Queen herself has expressed concern about the matter. Whatever I decide today will have far-reaching consequences. His gaze sharpened. So I ask you plainly, do you have proof of Lord Hartley's crimes, or merely accusations? Dominic placed the leather portfolio on the desk. I have proof, my lord. Substantial, documented, irrefutable proof. For the next hour, Dominic systematically presented the case. Bank records showing Percival's payments to Magistrate Holbrook, dated to coincide with key moments in Georgiana's trial. Affidavits from witnesses Percival had bribed into silence. Witnesses Dominic's investigators had located and convinced to tell the truth. Letters in Percival's own hand, discussing the falsification of documents. Financial records proving that he had been systematically looting the Cortland estates to fund gambling debts that would have ruined him without access to Georgiana's fortune. As the evidence mounted, Lord Ashford's expression grew increasingly grave. He examined each document with meticulous care, occasionally asking pointed questions that Dominic answered with precision. Finally, the Lord Chancellor sat back in his chair, his face creased with what might have been sorrow. This is explosive, Your Grace. If substantiated through official inquiry, Lord Hartley faces not merely loss of title, but criminal prosecution for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to defraud the crown. Then it must be substantiated, Dominic said quietly. Lady Georgiana has suffered 6 months of degradation and exile for crimes she never committed. She has been stripped of her title, her inheritance, her place in society. Justice demands restoration. Ashford turned his gaze to Georgiana, studying her with unnerving intensity. Tell me, Lady Georgiana, in your own words, why should I believe you over Lord Hartley? Georgiana's mouth went dry. This was the moment. Everything hinged on her answer. She thought of her father, who had believed in her capabilities when society said women were too weak to govern. She thought of the tenants who had wept when she was forced from Cortland estates. She thought of 6 months spent in degradation, her pride swallowed, her name dragged through mud, all while the man who had stolen everything lived in luxury purchased with her inheritance. "Because it's the truth, my lord," she said simply. "I do not ask you to believe me because I am virtuous or sympathetic. I ask you to believe the evidence. The documents do not lie. The witnesses do not lie. The bank records do not lie." Her voice strengthened. Lord Percival Hartley committed fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. He bribed officials of the crown and falsified legal documents. He did these things not because I was incompetent, but because I was inconvenient. Because he wanted my fortune and was willing to destroy me to take it. "And what of your relationship with the Duke?" Ashford asked. "Lord Hartley claims you seduced him to gain an ally." Heat bloomed in Georgiana's cheeks, but she held the Lord Chancellor's gaze. "I came to Thornwell House, seeking employment and evidence. I found both, but I also found a man of honor, who believed in justice enough to risk his own reputation to help me. Whatever relationship exists between the Duke and myself grew from mutual respect and shared purpose. I do not deny my feelings for him, but they in no way diminish the validity of my claim. And you, Your Grace?" Ashford turned to Dominic. "What is your personal interest in this matter?" Dominic met his gaze unflinchingly. "I love her, my lord, and I will not rest until she receives the justice she deserves." The admission hung in the air. A duke declaring love for a woman's society had labeled a fraud and a seductress. It was social suicide, and everyone in the room knew it. Lord Ashford was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met, Your Grace, or the most foolish." "Perhaps both, perhaps," Dominic agreed. "But I am also right." Ashford gathered the documents, tapping them against his desk to align the pages. "I will convene an emergency session of the Privy Council this afternoon. Lord Hartley will be summoned to answer these charges. In the meantime, I suggest you both prepare yourselves for what is to come." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "This will not be pleasant, Lady Georgiana. Your name, your character, your very sanity will be questioned publicly. Are you prepared for that?" "I have already lost everything, my lord," Georgiana said quietly. "I have nothing left to lose but my life, and I would rather die fighting than live in the shadows as a ghost." Ashford nodded slowly. "Then we fight. The hearing will commence at 3 o'clock. I suggest you use the intervening hours wisely." The Privy Council chamber was a cavernous room of vaulted ceilings and Gothic arches, its very architecture designed to intimidate. 12 of England's most powerful men sat in high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, lords who controlled armies, fortunes, and the fate of thousands. Georgiana stood in the center of the room, acutely aware of the emerald silk gown she wore, hastily borrowed from Dominic's sister and altered to fit her slighter frame. Her hair was dressed simply, pulled back to reveal her face without disguise or artifice. She wore no mask now, nothing to hide behind. To Lord Ashford's right sat the Duke of Wellington, the legendary general who had defeated Napoleon. To his left, the Archbishop of Canterbury in his ecclesiastical robes. And scattered among the others were men whose names appeared regularly in the newspapers, lords who shaped policy, commanded respect, and held the power of life and death over those brought before them. At the far end of the chamber, flanked by his own solicitors, stood Lord Percival Hartley. His face had gone the color of old parchment when Georgiana entered, his eyes widening in shock at her transformation from servant to Duchess. In the gallery reserved for observers, Dominic sat with rigid posture, his gray eyes never leaving Georgiana's face. She drew strength from his presence, knowing that whatever happened he would stand beside her. "Lady Georgiana Hartley," Lord Ashford intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber, "you stand before this council to contest the current disposition of the Duchy of Cortland. You claim that the title, currently held by Lord Percival Hartley, rightfully belongs to you by blood and by law. Is this correct?" "It is, my lord," Georgiana said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And you assert that the proceedings which stripped you of this title were fraudulent, based on falsified evidence and perjured testimony?" "I do, my lord." Ashford nodded to a clerk, who began distributing copies of the evidence Dominic had gathered. As the lords examined the documents, Georgiana felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything she had endured, every moment of degradation, every night spent in servants' quarters, every hour scrubbing floors, had led to this moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of parchment and the occasional murmur as one lord pointed out something to another. Finally, Lord Ashford spoke. "Lord Hartley, you will now address these allegations." Percival stepped forward, his jowls quivering with indignation. "My lords, this is nothing but the desperate fabrication of a disturbed woman. My cousin has been unwell since our uncle's death. Everyone who knew her can attest to her instability, fits of hysteria, irrational behavior, an inability to manage even simple household affairs." He gestured dismissively toward the documents. "As for these so-called bank records and affidavits, they are obvious forgeries, created to slander my good name and undermine my rightful inheritance." Forgeries. Wellington's gravelly voice cut through the chamber like a knife. "These bear the seals of the Bank of England, Lord Hartley. Are you suggesting that institution has conspired against you?" Percival's face reddened. "I am suggesting that a determined woman with the assistance of a besotted duke can manufacture nearly any evidence if given enough time and resources." "Then perhaps," Ashford said, his tone hardening, "you can explain why Magistrate Holbrook, when questioned under oath this morning, confessed to receiving payments from you in exchange for falsifying the documents that declared Lady Georgiana incompetent?" The chamber went deadly silent. Georgiana's breath caught. Dominic had gotten to Holbrook. Somehow, impossibly, he had convinced the magistrate to confess. Percival's face drained of all color. "That is, he cannot have—" "The magistrate is clearly attempting to save himself from—" "The magistrate," Wellington interrupted, "provided detailed testimony regarding your conspiracy. He named dates, amounts, and methods. He produced his own records of payments received. He has agreed to testify against you in exchange for clemency." The general's eyes, still sharp despite his years, fixed on Percival with the same intensity he had once turned on enemy commanders. "The evidence against you is overwhelming, Lord Hartley. This is a conspiracy," Percival shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. "The Duke of Thornwell has orchestrated this entire affair because he is besotted with a woman of loose morals. She has bewitched him, my lords, just as she attempted to bewitch me into surrendering what is rightfully mine. You will guard your tongue when speaking of the Duchess of Courtland." Dominic's voice rang out from the gallery, cold and lethal. "Or I will call you out, counsel be damned." "Your Grace, please," Ashford said mildly, though his eyes glinted with approval. He turned back to Percival. "Lord Hartley, unless you can provide credible refutation of these charges—" "I did what was necessary," Percival suddenly bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "The law gave the duchy to a girl of 18, a child who thought she could manage estates, control hundreds of tenants, make decisions affecting thousands of pounds. I acted to preserve the Courtland legacy from her incompetence." The admission rang through the chamber like a death knell. Several lords leaned back in their chairs, exchanging significant glances. The Archbishop's expression creased with sorrow. Wellington's face remained impassive, but his eyes hardened. "I was never incompetent," Georgiana said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the force of years of suppressed rage and pain. "I was trained by my father to manage the duchy. I studied estate management, agriculture, finance, law, everything necessary to fulfill my duties. I was ready, willing, and capable." She took a step toward Percival, her hands clenched at her sides. "You didn't steal my inheritance because I was incompetent, cousin. You stole it because you were greedy, because you wanted what I had, and were willing to destroy me to take it." "You destroyed yourself," Percival spat, his face purple with rage and fear. "Parading about in men's boots, reading books on estate management, thinking yourself equal to men born to rule. You were an embarrassment to the family name." an affront to every principle of natural order. And you, Georgiana replied, drawing herself to her full height and allowing every ounce of her birthright to shine through, are a thief and a coward who could not succeed on your own merit. So you stole from a grieving girl who trusted you. You destroyed the daughter of your own blood because you lacked the intelligence and ability to build your own fortune. The Archbishop leaned forward, his elderly face etched with disgust. Lord Hartley, by your own admission, you have committed fraud against your own blood. You have confessed to believing Lady Georgiana incompetent solely because of her sex. The Crown cannot allow such treachery and prejudice to stand unpunished. Ashford rose from his chair, his expression granite. Percival Hartley, this council finds sufficient evidence to strip you of the title Duke of Courtland, which you obtained through fraudulent means. All properties, incomes, and privileges associated with said title are hereby forfeit. Furthermore, you will face criminal prosecution for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to defraud the Crown. Bailiffs, remove him. 2 guards stepped forward. Percival collapsed to his knees, his bulk shaking with sobs that might have been genuine remorse or merely self-pity. Please, my lords, I beg you. I have a wife, children, debts. You should have considered them, Wellington said coldly, before you decided to destroy an innocent woman's life for your own gain. As the guards hauled Percival to his feet and led him from the chamber, still pleading, still making excuses, Georgiana felt her knees begin to buckle. The world seemed to tilt, spots dancing before her eyes. And then Dominic was there, having vaulted the gallery rail in defiance of all protocol. He caught her in his arms, holding her upright as she swayed. I have you, he murmured against her hair. I have you, my love. Lady Georgiana Hartley, Lord Ashford said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice now. This council formally recognizes your rightful claim to the Duchy of Courtland. All titles, properties, and incomes are hereby restored to you, effective immediately. We offer our profound apologies for the injustice you have suffered. The words washed over Georgiana like absolution, like rain after drought, like finally, being able to breathe after 6 months of drowning. She wept against Dominic's chest while the most powerful men in England looked on, and not one of them commented on the impropriety of it. This moment belonged to her, belonged to them, and even the stern lords of the Privy Council recognized that some things were too sacred to interrupt. Thank you, my lords, Georgiana managed when she could speak again. Thank you for hearing the truth. The Crown thanks you, Lady Georgiana, Ashford replied, for your persistence in seeking justice. You have reminded us all that titles and birthrights matter, yes, but truth and courage matter more. 3 months later, St. George's Chapel in Mayfair blazed with candlelight and flowers as all of London society gathered for the wedding of the Duke of Thornwell to the Duchess of Courtland. It was a union of equals, 2 powerful peers joining their names and fortunes, and the ton had descended en masse to witness the event that had transformed from scandal to fairy tale in the public imagination. The morning had dawned clear and bright, winter sunlight streaming through the chapel's stained-glass windows and casting jeweled patterns across the stone floor. Georgiana stood in the bride's room, hardly recognizing her own reflection. Her gown was ivory silk, embroidered with seed pearls, each one sewn by hand over hundreds of hours. The Courtland diamonds glittered at her throat, the same diamonds her grandmother, great-grandmother, and all the Courtland duchesses before her had worn on their wedding days. Her honey-colored hair was dressed in an elaborate coiffure, threaded with orange blossoms, and a delicate lace veil cascaded down her back. You are breathtaking, Lady Catherine Thornwell said softly, adjusting the veil with gentle hands. My brother is the most fortunate man in England. I am the fortunate one, Georgiana replied, her voice thick with emotion. He saved me, Catherine. When I had lost everything, when I was ready to surrender to despair, he saved me. You saved each other, Catherine corrected, taking Georgiana's hands in hers. Dominic had been alone for so long, locked away in his fortress of ice. After our mother's abandonment, after his friend's betrayal, I watched him become colder and more distant with each passing year. I feared I had lost my brother entirely. Tears shimmered in her eyes. But you brought him back to life, Georgiana. You reminded him that trust and love still exist. You gave him hope. A knock sounded, and Lord Ashford entered in his formal robes, looking distinguished and faintly amused. "It is time, Your Grace," he said kindly, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The Lord Chancellor had graciously agreed to give Georgiana away in her father's absence, a gesture of both respect and atonement for the injustice she had endured. As they walked toward the chapel doors, Georgiana felt her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder, blessing this union. The church bells began to toll, their joyous pealing echoing across London. The massive doors swung open, and the organ thundered to life, filling the chapel with glorious sound. Georgiana walked down the aisle on Lord Ashford's arm, aware of hundreds of eyes upon her dukes and duchesses, earls and countesses, members of Parliament, lords of the Privy Council. They had all come to witness the triumph of the woman many had once scorned, the vindication of justice, the marriage of the season. But Georgiana saw none of them. Her eyes found Dominic standing at the altar in his formal mourning coat, his dark hair perfectly dressed, his gray eyes fixed on her with such love that her breath caught. This man, this proud, guarded, brilliant man, had chosen her, had fought for her, had loved her when the world called her worthless. When she reached the altar, Dominic took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in that private gesture that had become their secret language. "You came," he murmured, his lips quirking into a small smile. "Did you doubt I would?" she whispered back. "Never," he said, "but I am grateful nonetheless." The Archbishop of Canterbury cleared his throat, though he was smiling despite himself at their obvious devotion. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony passed in a blur of sacred vows and exchanged rings. Georgiana spoke her promises in a clear voice, meaning every word, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. When Dominic slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, but she could see the emotion shimmering in his eyes. "I, Dominic Grayson, take thee, Georgiana Hartley, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice resonating through the chapel. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." And then the Archbishop was pronouncing them man and wife, and Dominic was drawing Georgiana into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that made the assembled guests sigh collectively. "I love you, Georgiana Grayson, Duchess of Cortland and Thornwell," he said against her lips. "And I love you, Dominic Grayson, Duke of Thornwell, and my heart's home," she replied. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, while the organ thundered and society applauded. Outside the chapel, the streets were lined with common folk who had heard the story of the fallen Duchess, who reclaimed her throne and found love in the process. They cheered and threw rice and flowers as Dominic handed Georgiana into their carriage. As the carriage pulled away toward Thornwell House, where a magnificent wedding breakfast awaited, Georgiana leaned against her husband's shoulder, overwhelmed by the enormity of all that had changed. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what might have happened if you had not been in foul temper that night? If you had not commanded me to clean your study?" Dominic tilted her face up to his eyes warm with love and mischief. "Then I suppose I would have had to manufacture some other crisis to bring you into my orbit. Fate, it seems, was determined to throw us together." "Fate," Georgiana agreed, "and my stubborn refusal to accept defeat." "That stubborn refusal," Dominic said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, "is one of the many reasons I adore you." The carriage rolled through the gates of Thornwell House, where a new life awaited, a life built on truth, equality, and a love forged in the fires of adversity. The autumn sun cast golden light across the Cortland estates, turning the harvested fields into a patchwork of amber and gold. Georgiana rode her mare along the familiar paths of her childhood, her heart swelling with contentment. In the years since she had reclaimed her duchy, she had transformed the estates. New farming techniques had increased crop yields by 30%. Schools now operated in 3 villages, educating both boys and girls in reading, writing, and mathematics. The charitable fund she had established provided support for widows, orphans, and families facing hardship. But more than that, she had proven what her father had always known, that capability had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with will, intelligence, and compassion. As she approached the manor house, she saw Dominic waiting in the courtyard, and her heart did that familiar flip it always did when she saw him. He stood beside the fountain, tall and handsome, his face lighting with joy the moment he spotted her. "How were the tenants?" he asked, as he helped her dismount. "Thriving," Georgiana replied, going into his arms. "The harvest exceeded all projections. We'll have surplus to sell at market, and enough to ensure every family has plenty stored for winter." "Because you are brilliant," Dominic said, kissing her temple. "And I have news from London." They walked into the house together, entering the drawing room where tea had been laid before a crackling fire. This room, her father's favorite, had been restored to exactly as Georgiana remembered it. Sometimes, sitting here, she could almost hear her father's voice approving her decisions, proud of what she had accomplished. "Percival's trial concluded," Dominic said as he poured tea. 15 years transportation to New South Wales. Georgiana felt no triumph, only closure. "And his family? The trust you established is supporting them. His wife has taken the children to live with her sister in the countryside. They will be comfortable, if not wealthy." "Good," Georgiana said softly. She had learned that true strength lay not in vengeance, but in mercy, in breaking cycles of cruelty rather than perpetuating them. "There's more," Dominic continued, his eyes twinkling. "The Queen has requested your presence at a special reception next month. Apparently, you have become something of a symbol for women throughout the realm." "I never saw it." "I know," Dominic interrupted gently, "but you have become one nonetheless. Several peeresses have written, asking for your counsel on estate management, on navigating Parliament, on asserting their rights. You are changing England, my love. One determined woman at a time." Georgiana set down her teacup and moved to sit beside her husband, resting her head on his shoulder. Through the window, she could see the Cortland lands stretching to the horizon, lands she had reclaimed through courage and truth. "Do you remember that night?" she asked, "when I arrived drenched and desperate at your door?" "How could I forget?" Dominic replied, his arm encircling her waist. "It was the night my life began." "And mine," Georgiana agreed. "I walked through your door as a servant, broken and desperate. And I found not just justice, but love. Not just my title, but my home. Not just my inheritance, but my future." Dominic drew her close, his embrace both shelter and fortress. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I will spend every day of my life being worthy of you." "You already are," Georgiana whispered. "You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when the world called me mad. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but my scarred heart and stubborn will." "Your heart was never scarred," Dominic corrected softly. "Merely tested. And your will, that beautiful unbreakable will, is what saved us both." Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the ancient oaks of Cortland, carrying the scent of harvest and wood smoke, and the promise of winter's rest before spring's renewal. Inside, a duchess and her duke sat before the fire, their hands entwined, their hearts complete. Georgiana had entered Thornwell House as a dispossessed woman, hiding behind a false name. She had reclaimed her identity as the Duchess of Cortland, vindicated, and victorious. But she had found her truest self in the arms of the man who loved her, not for her title or her beauty, but for the fierce, brilliant, unconquerable soul that no adversity could diminish. The rain had fallen mercilessly that night in Mayfair, turning the streets to rivers of gray. But from that tempest had emerged something precious and enduring, a love forged in darkness, tested by betrayal, and proven stronger than any title, any fortune, any obstacle the world could devise. And as Georgiana rested against Dominic's shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, she knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. Thank you for joining Georgiana and Dominic on their journey from that fateful rainy night to their triumphant happy ending. Their story reminds us that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising again, and that the greatest victories are won not alone, but with someone who believes in us even when we've lost faith in ourselves. If you loved this story, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who enjoys tales of romance, resilience, and redemption. Your support helps us create more stories like this one.